Kadosh Boker or Daf Yomi Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Pegimel Amud Aleph 83A1. If you remember yesterday, the last thing that we mentioned was that there was a question from Rav Acha bar Huna that he asked on Rav Sheshat from Mishnah in Masechet Zevachim. The Mishnah over there that said that if you're going to pour oil on the flour offering, on the mincha, or your bolel, which means you're going to knead it, or potet, which means you're going to make it into ptiti, you're going to make it into like the forms of the bread after you baked it. Vamoleach, or you're going to salt a sacrifice. Samanif, you're going to wave it. Magish, you're going to bring it. Saderet shulchan, or you're going to bring and you're going to set up and arrange the lechem apanim on the shulchan, right, on the table which was in the Hechal. Hametivet nerot, or you came and you did the nerot, which means you set up the candles in the on the menorah in the Hechal. Vakometz, or you did kimitza. Vamkabelet adamim, and you received the bloods. Bachutz, we're talking about outside of the Zara. You're going to be patur. You're not going to be chayav lo mishum zarut. That means, let's say it was not a kohen. So usually, if a non-kohen does a service, he's usually chayav because it's a zar. Here, he's not going to be chayav mita. The person is not going to be chayav mishum tumah, which means that if the person was tameh, if the kohen was the tameh, he's not going to be chayav. Or if the kohen was lacking clothing, we know that whenever the kohanim do the service in the Bet HaMikdash, they have to have their clothing. They have to be wearing their clothing when doing the service. Okay, plus they have to do kiddush yadayim raglaim. Remember that they take the kior vekano, and what they do is that they're going to wash their hands and their feet, right? So it's one hand with one feet, and the same with the other way around. So therefore, says the Gemara now. 1 second, hamekater. It's mashma that if they're maktir the ketoret, which basically they're going to be maktir the comments of the mincha betum'ah, which that's the last avodah, meaning the beginning avodot, they're not going to be chayav. Mashma that the last avodah, they're going to be chayav. Now, what does it mean chayav? Chayav mita bidei shamayim, because that's what happens when a person comes and he serves in Bet HaMikdash, right, in the non-proper form. So answers the Gemara, lo, no. We're talking about an azara. What does that mean? He's going to be over on an azara avelo yechalelu. You should not desecrate. And therefore, since there's a negative commandment, he's chayav malkut, but there's no mita b'dei shemayim. Remember that whenever there's a negative commandment in the Torah where there's an action, right? So what happens is that there's lashes, okay? Because this is talking about a love. A love, if there's no death penalty or karet or something mentioned, so therefore there's always going to be lashes involved. Ella, but rather the Mishnah, if we're not talking about nach yuv mita, but only azara. So zarnami la azara. You're going to tell me now that when it talks about that a zar cannot come and serve in the Bet HaMikdash, remember a zar is a stranger, okay, which means that he's a non-kohen. Are you going to tell me that it's only an azara and what? And there's not going to be even chiyuv malkut? He says vaktiva azara karev yumat. There it says mifurash that he's going to die. So therefore, right, that's what we're trying to say over here. When the Mishnah comes and he says you're not going to be chayav on zerut, right, on meaning you're a zar, is because you didn't finish the korban, right? And that's why you're not going to be chayav mita. So if so, you shouldn't be chayav mishum tum'ah, or you shouldn't be right. It's only that you're not chayav mita, right? But really, be'emet, if you brought the ketoret, it's not that the ketoret is the only one that you get lashes, right? It's that that's the one that for sure you're going to be chayav mita, but you finished it. Meaning, when you finish the product, that's when you're going to be punished, right? So fine. So says the Gemara, you're right. Ha kedeita, ha kedeita. You're right. Each one accordingly, which means to do a zarut, right? The kavanah is that a person is not going to be chayav on these things, meet on right death penalty, which is mita b'dei shemayim. But to do with tum'ah, right, a person is not going to be chayav, right, malkut. And even though there are two isurim one beside each other, it doesn't mean that they have to be equal to each other. So miklal, so you could infer from here, the yotzek ubolel, that when we're talking about now yitzika and belila, right, which is basically the pouring of the oil or the kneading of it, lav namilo. So therefore, what? There's not even nisur lav. But Tanya, we learned in a Braita, zara liyotzek ubolel. How do you know that you're not allowed to do that? Kedoshim yu v'lo yechallu. What does that mean? Kedoshim yu lelohem. You have to become holy to your God, and you're not allowed to make a chilul Hashem. Not allowed to desecrate your God. So therefore, since yitzikam belila is a negative commandment, so therefore, if the Mishnah comes and it says you're not chayavim alem mishum tum'ah, it means you're not chayav mita b'dei shamayim. So says the Gemara, right? He says, really, be'emet, this entire isur is only the Rabbanan. Ukra asmachta be'alma. but the pasuk is just an asmachta, meaning many times you will only have a rabbinical prohibition. It's only midrabanan, zerak midrabanan. Aval, we want to come and say that the rabbis made the decree because of something midoraita, because it had some hint or it had something to do with the doraita. So therefore, when we come and we say, look, pay attention, it looks like a, so the pasuk is an asmachta. What's an asmachta? It looks like it. Okay? Fine. Meitvei, so now we're going to ask another question now on Rav Sheshat. Ve'eluhen, these are the cases of what? That a person is going to be chayav mitabid shamayim. And one of them is tameh shashimesh. One of them is a kohen tameh that he served in the Bet HaMikdash. So we know that if a kohen was tameh and he serves in the Bet HaMikdash, he gets what? Mitabid shamayim. So says the Gemara, inachanam, you're right, tuvta. It's a good question. Right? It's a beautiful question. Why? It's mefurash that there is a chiyuv mita bidei shamayim for kohen, which is going to serve in the Bet HaMikdash when he's tameh. Okay? Fine. So let's start. Gufa. Right? We're going to bring a braita. Elu she mita. These are the ones that get mita bidei shamayim. Number one, ochelet tevel. Remember that when a person comes and he eats food, produce, which was not taken off trumot u'masrot. That's called tevel. So when a person comes and he's going to eat tevel, yeah, so what happens? He's going to be chayav bidei shamayim. Next, kohen, right? Kohen tameh, shachal truma teora. Kohen tameh that he comes and he eats truma teora. Also, mita bidei shamayim, right? We're on page Gimel in the middle of the page, right? 83. Vizar, a stranger that eats truma. V'zar sheshimesh, or a stranger that does the service in the Bet HaMikdash. V'tamesh shimesh, or a tameh that comes and does the service, right? In the meaning he's a kohen tameh that he does the service in the Bet HaMikdash. Utvul yom sheshimesh, or even if he did tevilah but he's still not tahor until the nighttime. Mechusar begadim, the one that does not have right the clothing, or mechusar kapara is lacking kapara, which means a korban, or a kohen that did not do the chutz yadayim raglayim. Imagine like this: a kohen comes. He comes inside here. He's in the Bet HaMikdash doing the service, but he didn't do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. You know what Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is? With the Kior Vekano. He didn't wash his hands and his feet. How do you wash your hands and your feet? One hand with one foot, the other hand with the other foot. That's how you do it. Right? The Kior Vekano, you come here. If you don't do that, and you do the service in the Bet HaMikdash, Chayav Mitab Bidei Shamayim. Death penalty from Hashem. Hashem will take care of him, basically. Yeah? Next. Right? Ushtuye yain ufre rosh. A kohen that comes and he does the service in the Bet HaMikdash when he drank wine, right? Obviously, we're talking about a revita wine, or pruer rosh, and he didn't have his head covered. Aval, however, though, arel veonen, if you have a person that does not have a brit milah or an onen, right? That means he's in an aninut, he still didn't bury his family member, or yoshev, right? Or he's doing it sitting down. Enan b'mita, they don't get the death penalty of mita b'deshamayim, but rather only azara. A balmum, a kohen balmum, Rabbi Omer mita. Rabbi says it's mita b'dei shamayim. Chachamim say it's a nazara. Hezid b'meila. If he did it purposely, Rabbi Omer b'mita. Rabbi says that it's going to be mita b'dei shamayim. Chachamim omrim be'azhara. Okay. So as we already mentioned, remember that now we're going to dissect that braita, and one by one we're going to try to find the source of mita b'dei shamayim by each one. So the first one was aochelet tevil. How do you know that if you eat untithed produce, which means produce that was not taken off through motu masrot, how do you know you're going to be chayav mita b'dei shamayim? Answers the Gemara. Tamar Shmuel mishum Rabbi Eliezer, says Shmuel the Rabbi Eliezer, minayin leochelet tevel shu b'mita. How do we know that if you're going to eat tevel, you're going to be chayav mita? Dichtiv, it says in a pasuk, Velo yechalelu et koche b'nei Yisrael et asher yarimu laHashem. You should not desecrate the koche b'nei Yisrael which they were yarimu laHashem. Atidim litrom, right? Hakatuv medaber. We're talking about that in the future they're going to come and they're going to take it off in the future. They're going to redeem it. They're going to take off the trumot u'masrot in the future. V'yaliv chilul chilul mitruman. They're going to learn chilul chilul from teruma. Male halan, just like over there, it's talking about mita b'dei shamayim, right? Because that's what we're talking about over there with the yisur of tevel. So to here we're talking about the mita b'dei shamayim. So ask the Gemara v'neiluf. So why don't we learn, right? He says, why don't we learn, right? Chilul chilul minotar, meaning leaving over. You know that you're not allowed to leave over a part of the korban. But he says, but if you are going to leave over a part of the korban, male halan, it's karet. So to here should be karet, meaning it should be much stricter form of a punishment, not much lighter. It should be stricter. Okay. So says the Gemara. Yeah, he says mistabra mitruma v'lemelaf. No, he likes the French one. Just trying to see. Right, he says it's logical to say that we're learning it from truma. Sheken truma, because by truma is we're talking about chutzaretz, is hutra barabim. Right, what does that mean? Remember the many times we come and we always try to find similarities. It's more mistaber to learn tevel, right, from truma, because number one, both of them have a side of truma, because you have to take off truma from tevel as well. Number two, they're not in chutzaretz. Truma is only in Israel, not in chutzaretz. Number three, hutra. What does that mean? They're both is a tzad of heter, right? And not like notar. Notar is a sud forever. When you leave over a korban, kaddish, there's nothing to talk about. Here, right, truma, there's a form of a heter. A kohen could eat it. Or tevel, you could take off trumot umatzot and then they could eat it. Number four, it's berabim. Velo yichalelu, ki yichaleluhu. Notar is velo yichalel. It's singular, right? B'lashon yachid. Number five, it's talking about perot. Now, notar is meat. It's not produce. It's not fruits, right? Fruits and vegetables and like things like that, or produce. So he says grains. So vav and zayin is pigul venotar, which means that it's not going to be noheg, not in tevel and not in truma, only in kodshim. There's an isur of pigul and notar. So it says the Gemara Adarabah, the exact opposite. Minotar v'lelmelaf. You should have learned it from notar. Sheken pesul ochel en lo eter b'mikveh. Remember that by notar, right? It's much more domet to not, meaning tevel is domet to notar, because whether it's tevel or notar, it's going to be psul by ochel, and therefore there's no heter by mikveh. We know that, but when a person comes and he eats trumat me'ah, there is a heter. You put the kohen, which is tameh, into the mikveh, and now he becomes tahor. So answers the Gemara, hanach nefishan. Remember that whenever we're making similarities, it's a numbers game. The previous one, when we were comparing truma and tevel, there was 7 similarities between truma and tevel. Right? We brought down the 7 similarities. We said the first one is to do a truma, that you take off truma. Then we said a chutzaretz. There's a heter. It's mentioned in Lashon Rabim. You have it's only in perot and not by meat. Pigul and notar. That's 7. Here it's only 1. So if it's a numbers game, 7 against 1, obviously 7 is going to win. Ravina comes and he says another answer. Chilul de Rabim, chilul de Rabim adif. It's always better to compare a chilul which is said in Lashon Rabim to a chilul which is said in Lashon Rabim. Okay, ve'kohen tameh she'achal truma Torah minalan. How do you know when you have a kohen that's tameh, that he eats truma? How do we know that he's chayav mitah bidei shamayim? So the Gemara Shmuel says, "Minayin lekohen tameh she'achal truma Torah shu b'mitah bidei shamayim." Tichtiv, it says in a pasuk, "V'shamru b'mishpatim v'lisut et lav chet umetu bo ki yichalu." You have to watch over my guardings, and you should not carry the sin. But if you do, umetu bo ki yichalu, he will die because of the chilul. Tehora, so the mashma in the Braita that we're talking about truma tehora in tmealo, right? The Amar Shmuel Amar Bilazar says Shmuel the name of Bilazar. Minayin lekohen tameh she'achal truma tmea she'eno b'mitah. How do we know you have a kohen tameh that's eating truma tmea that he's not going to be chayav mitah b'dei shamayim? Shneimar v'says the pasuk umetu bo ki yichalu. Okay, prat lezo pegim lamud bet. Yeah, 83b. This comes to exclude shemechulelet ve'omedet, that is already mechulal. Why? Because he's already tameh. Even before eating of it, he's already tameh and he's not allowed to eat such a thing. Next one. V'zar sha'achalet truma. How do you know that a stranger is not allowed to eat truma? A non-kohen. How do you know he's not allowed to eat truma? So says the Gemara on Pegim Lamubed, the 2 dots. Amar Rav says, Zar sha'achalet truma loke. He gets lashes. Amdi Rav Kana v'Ravasi l'Rav. So comes and they said Rav Kana and Ravasi to Rav. Leima mor b'mitah. Why don't you just say it's a death penalty? Why did you say only lashes? Only malkut. Tichtiv v'chol zal lo yochal kodesh. You're not allowed to eat kodesh. So he answers, Ani Hashem mekadesham ifsika inyan. There was a pasek. Why was there a pasek? He says because when it says Ani Hashem mekadesham, there's a break. Once there's a break, now when it says v'chol zal lo yochal kodesh, when it says umetu bo ki yochalu, that means there's a break in between. So once there's a break, you can't put them both together. Okay? So meitvei. So we're going to ask the following question. Ve'elu hen shebemita. There's going to be people that are going to be chayav mitah b'dei shamayim, and one of them is zara ochelet truma. So why do you tell me that a zara ochelet truma is only chayav malkut. Here in this braita, we learned it's mitabi de shamayim, not lashes. It's mitabi de shamayim. So answers the Gemara, matnita de Rav karamit. You're asking a question from a braita to Rav. He says Rav Tana upalig. Remember, many times in Shas we see that Rav is like a Tana, and therefore he could argue. Which means even though he was not a Tana, he's like a Tana. He's allowed to argue right on the braita. Okay. V'zar sheshimesh. When you have a zar sheshimesh, is going to be chayav mitabi deshamayim. So that's how we learned that what? That it's going to be mitabi deshamayim. So there's a machloket, whether it's mitabi deshamayim or lashes, a machloket between Rav, right, and the Braita. So he says, zar sheshimesh. What happens now if you have a stranger that he serves in the Bet HaMikdash? Imagine, you and me, we go in the Bet HaMikdash, we're going to serve. But we're strangers, we're non-Kohens. So it's chayav mitabi deshamayim. How do we know? It's written in the Torah. The Torah says the stranger that comes close, right? No strangers allowed. It's like the kitchen, right? No strangers allowed. Right? It's only the wife. She's the one in the kitchen. Other than that, no strangers allowed. Knisa lezarim asura. Okay? Fine. Next. Tameh sheshimesh. What happens if the Kohen is tameh and he served in the Bet HaMikdash? Chayav mitabi deshamayim. Just like it was asked of Chia Baravi Rav Yosef. Chia Baravi from Rav Yosef. Minayin, how do we know that a Kohen shimesh shu b'mita? Tichtiv, it says that the pasuk Dabel Aaron v'banav v'nizru b'kodshei v'nisav lo'chalu kodshei kodshi. You have to speak to Aaron and his children, and they have to separate themselves from kodshei v'nisel, and they shouldn't desecrate my kodesh. Pialif, we're making a limul chilul from truma. Just like if somebody is going to eat truma, if he's tameh is chayav mita b'dei shamayim, so too the chilul is that if a person is going to come and serve in the Bet HaMikdash, he's going to be chayav mita b'dei shamayim. So ask the Gemara v'neilaf, why don't we learn it chilul from notar? That over there it's karet, so to here it's karet. So again, now we're going to have to compare teruma to what? To kohen tamesh shimesh. So he says mistabra mitruma v'lemelaf. It's still more logical to learn from truma. Why? Again, similarities. So number one, sheken guf. Here we're talking about the guf of the kohen is having. There's something with the guf of the kohen. It's either the guf of the kohen is eating the truma and he's tameh, or the guf of the kohen is doing the service in the Bet HaMikdash. Right? Notar has nothing to do with the guf of the kohen. He's just leaving over leftovers. Number two, tameh. Both of them is truma. He's tameh and he's eating truma. He's tameh and he's doing the service in the Bet HaMikdash. Number three, mikveh. Right? We know that by notar, it doesn't help to put in the mikveh. Notar is leftovers. What does it help to put in? When the kohen is tameh, he goes to the mikveh. Now he's allowed to eat truma. When the kohen is tameh, he goes to the mikveh. Now he's allowed to go to the Bet HaMikdash. So mikveh. Number four, berabim. Again, velo yichalu, right? It's written in Lashon Rabim, not Lashon Yachid, right? So therefore, you have four things here. So four similarities between Kohen Tameh, Sheshimesh, and Truma. Says the Gemara, Adrab, the opposite. Minotar avelemeilaf, right? You should have learned it from Notar. Why? Sheken number one, Kodesh. Notar leaving over has to do with Kodshim. So too, when a Zar is going to come and he's going to serve in the Bet HaMikdash, that's called Kodshim. Truma is not Kodshim. It's not Kodshim. It's one level down than Kodshim. You remember, Kodshim goes until Revi'i. Truma is Shlishi. It's one level down. Number two, Panim. Panim, what do you mean Panim? It's inside of the Azara. We're talking about the Notar is the Korbanot and everything. That's inside the Bet HaMikdash. The Kohen that's serving the Bet HaMikdash is inside the Bet HaMikdash. Truma, you could eat in your house. It has nothing to do with Bet HaMikdash. Truma is you go to your house, you eat Truma. Number 3 and 4, Pigul v'Notar. So therefore, it comes out that you have 4 against 4. 4 similarities. Comparing Kohen Tamesh Shimesh to Truma, and 4 similarities between Kohen Tamesh Shimesh and what? And Notar. So answers the Gemara, Chilul Derabim mi Chilul Derabim Adif. It's much better to compare Chilul Derabim from Chilul Derabim, meaning since it was both used in the terminology of Rabim, of the public doing it, it's much better to do so. Next, Tvul Yom. Somebody that's Tvul Yom. Remember, Tvul Yom is that he went to the mikveh, right? He went to the mikveh, but he doesn't become tahor until the nighttime. That's called a tvul yom. Okay? You look in the footnote, yeah? He mentions it on Amud Aleph 14. Menalan, how do we know that if a person is tvul yom and he comes and he does the service, how do you know that he's going to be chayav mitabi de shamay? Menalan, how do we know? Tanya Rabbi Simai Omer, says Rabbi Simai, Rem is the tvul yom, shimavar v'chilel minayin. How do we know that if a tvul yom came and he did the service of Bet HaMikdash, how do we know that he was chilel? Tamul Omar, kedoshim yu lelohem v'lo yichallu. You have to be holy and do not desecrate. If you do not need it for the actual person that's tameh, So, right, Imenu Inyan, Tamesh Shimesh Denafkala Minizru was already learned it. So Teneolan is Volyom Shashimshu. So you learn it from the Tvulyom Shashimshu. So says the Gemara, V'yaliv Chilul Chilu Mitruma. Learn it from Truma. Mala Hala Memita. So to here it's going to be Bemita, right? So therefore that's where they're learning from. So the Tvulyom at the end they are going to learn it from the Truma. Okay. Next, Mechusar Begadim. How do you know that if you serve in the Bet HaMikdash without the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, meaning you didn't have your uniform? If you don't have your uniform, you could be a Kohen, you could be pure, you could be everything. Mitabi de Shamayim. When you serve in the Bet HaMikdash, you need your uniform. Says Minalan. Amar Rabbi Amir Rabbi Avu Amar Rabbi Yochanan Matuba. Some people say with the name of Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, the Chagarta Otam Avnet. We just learned it right in the parasha. The Chagarta Otam Avnet. Aaron and Moshe to put on the Avnet, the belt, the hat, and it's going to be Kiunat, right? Kiunat lechukat olam. Bizman shebigdehem alehem kiunatam alehem. Only when they have their clothing, they're kohanim. Shen bigdehem alehem, but when they don't have their clothing, and kiunatam alehem. It's incredible. You see for me the mamash. Look how much the clothing has an effect on them. They need their, if they don't have their uniform, it's not the same. The haveluhu. So we ask, what? It's going to become like zarim. So mamash, and then what happens? So therefore, if it's going to be a zar sheshimesh chayimita. Mamash, that means it's going to be, you're a stranger. You have a Kohen. Look his lineage, everything. He just doesn't have the clothing. You don't have the clothing? Nothing. You're a stranger. Huh? Yeah, forastero. Umchusar kapara. Yeah, next one. If you're lacking kapara, which means that they did not bring the korban yet. Menalan, how do we know that you're going to be chayav mitabi deshamayim? Ravuna says, the pasuk says, the chiper alea kohen v'tahera. What does that mean? He's going to atone. It's going to be a kapara. Tahara miklal shitmea. When it says tahara, it's mashma derus tmea. But more says tamesh shimesh b'mita. We know that if a person is tamen, he's going to do the service, right? He's going to be chayav mitabi deshamayim. So the same thing. Mechusat kapara is like a tuma, but he didn't have the kapara yet. He didn't bring the korban. What about a kohen that did not do kiddush yadayim raglayim? He didn't wash his hands and feet before doing the service in the Bet HaMikdash. How do we know that he's chayav mitabi deshamayim? Menalan, how do we know? Dichtiv, it says in the pasuk, v'voam al moed yirchatzu mayim v'lo. Right, when they're going to come and going into the Ol Moed, they have to wash their hands and their feet, and then they shouldn't die. Right, that's in the beginning of this week's parasha of Ki Tisa that we're going to read this morning now. So he says, from here we learn that if you're going to do the service without doing the kiddush yadayim raglayim, washing your hands and your feet, chayav mitabi deshamayim. Next one, drinking wine. How do we know that somebody's drunk? Doesn't have to be drunk completely, smashed. Even mamash drinks a revit wine. How do we know he's chayav mitabi deshamayim? Tichtiv, it says in the pasuk, is in parashat Shmini, yaim v'shechal al tesht, which means that you're not allowed to come and drink wine. Pruei rosh, how do you know you're not allowed to have your head uncovered when you do the service in the Bet HaMikdash? Tichtiv, it says in the pasuk, v'rosham lo yigalechu, fera lo yishalechu. What does that mean? It says in Yecheskel that they should not have their heads, shaved off, or fera. What does that mean? But it says, v'yan lo yishtu. So there's a kesh, itkash. There's a kesh, pruei rosh l'shtuyei yain. Just like shtuye yain is mitabi deshamayim, somebody gets drunk. If he drinks wine, he's chayav mitabi deshamayim. So too, if he does pruei rosh, he's going to be chayav mitabi deshamayim. Aval, however, though, arel, somebody that does not have a brit milah, right, uncircumcised, onen, which means that they did not bury the deceased, he's still an onen. Or yoshev, he's doing it when he's sitting down. He has to do the service always standing up. He's going to be chayav. He's not going to be chayav mitah. It's only ba'azara. Arel menalan. How do we know this? Amar Rav Chasar says, we learned it from Torah Moshe Rabbeinu. Lolo manu, really from Torah Moshe Rabbeinu we didn't learn it. And he taught it. Ben nechar arel lev ve'arel basar lo yavo el mikdashi. Do not come into my mikdash. So from here we learn that a kohen arel is a sur to go into the Bet HaMikdash and to do the avodah. Onen menalan. How do we know the onen? Peidal the mudada from the top. Onen. How do we know? תכתיב ומן המקדש יוצא ולא יחלל את מקדש אלוקיו האחר שלא יצא חילל. So it comes out that only by Aaron Kohen, by the Kohen Gadol, is he supposed to do the service when he's on onen. Mashma, any other Kohen, you're not allowed to do the service when he's on onen. That's what we learn. Okay, so the Gemara is going to ask, Amal Rava, Ravada Rava, Venina, why do you learn chiluf mitruma? That just like over there it's mitabi deshamayim, so too here it's going to be mitabi deshamayim, but it says velo yechalel. So answers the Gemara, miktiv begufe. It doesn't say chilul by the Kohen Ediot himself by onen. Miklal dati. So therefore, it's like a davar abba min haklal. It's something coming from the general rule, and not from the actual mashmaut of the pasuk. And anything which comes from the klal, we don't learn from a Gzera Shava. Meaning, if it's not coming from the actual general rule, we're not allowed to do a Gzera Shava to apply all the halachot to it.